Thank you, Eric. Thank you everyone for joining this panel. I'm really glad to be here. So I'm Alexandra Griffon, one of the two co-founders and CEO of BlueCargo. And a huge thanks to Eric, Tim, and Mike for being here. And it says a lot about the partnership we have together on international freight audit. So BlueCargo, I'll tell you a bit of my story in a couple of seconds and how it led to BlueCargo. But my background came from working on the port terminal side of things. So on the operational side and picking up and returning containers and managing equipment. So that has actually led to building today a specialized in international freight audit company, very different from the others. So we launched the company 7.5 years ago, and if I was thinking I was going to build a freight audit company, I probably wouldn't have done it that way, and we would have started looking at contracts, managing rates, etc. But because we came from this shipment background and working at the ports and working with the drayage tracking companies, we're really able to fit in where there was a need in the market. So story pain points that happen in international audits is really around the manual review that has to be done, cost leakage, and also having this true spend intelligence at the container level landed cost. And that's what we're able to provide because we track the container, we understand the shipment life cycle, and we can audit against the operational data. So that's a bit about BlueCargo and talking about the contract to cash playbook. So from contract and rates management to audit and dispute, and to that whole spend intelligence. And the way BlueCargo works is a mix of both building software, leveraging AI, and also applying the services so that our customers don't have to do the lift of those manual reviews and can rely on both the technology and the experience and marrying them together.
Great, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan Gross. I work at the Home Depot. I lead international logistics for the company, responsible for origin operations, ocean transportation, customs brokerage, drayage, transload, and exports. I've been with Home Depot for 14 years, and thank you for having me on the panel today.
Awesome, thanks, Dan.
Yep, so I'm Tim Lyle. I'm more specific. I'm the freight payment team manager at Michelin, North America. So responsible for all our freight, domestic and international.
Okay.
Hi everybody, I'm Mike Naismith. I'm with the Kohler Company. So I lead our logistics and network strategy group for our Kitchen and Bath Americas team. A lot of things go into that group, but primarily import-export operations, all of our cross-border operations, some inventory deployment, and network strategy. So again, really happy to be part of this team, so thank you.
We've heard over the last 2 days all of the sort of geopolitical trade policy impacts that are hitting importers these days. Can you kind of give some context for how your companies are viewing how you're managing costs in that environment where it seems like volatility is now the norm and what that means from a cost perspective? So in other words, let's frame this discussion about how you're managing it on a process or a micro level by talking about how the macro is affecting decision making and investment into things. Maybe Dan, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I would say in supply chain, we're always focused on driving out costs, right? We've got a job to get product where it needs to go at the lowest cost possible with the best service. And so cost is always part of the equation. I think especially everyone in this who's here today, this week in LA is focused on international shipping. And we know over the past few years, it's been, actually the past few years have been somewhat, we've had our own problems, but not as bad as 4+ years ago, right? Where everyone in our C-suites was talking about everything that we do, and they learned a lot more about detention, demurrage, and our expenses than we ever would want them to, unfortunately, right? But so I would say now, going back to your question, Eric, we are focused on driving out costs in any ways we can. Looking with more scrutiny at all of our line items, looking at all of our typical transactions and operations, and finding where there's dollars to squeeze, so we can give it back to, in our case, our customers and the price of goods.
Yeah. Tim, Mike, are you under the same constraints?
Pretty much the same thing. We have different options as far as avoiding tariffs on our sourcing, and because we're a large global company, so we explore that. But I'm really focused on the detention demurrage, which has really been tough for us. It's gotten better with a lot of hard work, but we want to get over the hump a little bit farther.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd say 2 weeks ago, our team was like, all right, we're gonna go to Long Beach and have a nice little vacation this year because things are pretty calm. But that turned around quickly, and for the last 2 days, we've been discussing ways to stay ahead of that. But to echo both comments, Rick, cost critically important to us as we look at the entire supply chain, including inventory. So when we look at cost to move freight across the world, we're also looking at how many days does it take in transit. How do we manage our inventory from our Eastern or West Coast distribution centers? And what's that nice mix between cost and service to both our production plants and to our end customers?
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing to think about as we go through each of their experiences is they're sort of at different stages, right? I think it's fair to say that Home Depot is probably the furthest along, Kohler probably in the mid-range, and Michelin just starting out. So that's the frame, the context to frame kind of how they're looking at this. So Dan, when did you identify what the problem was and how you were going to go about solving it? Was it an internal thing that you could manage, or did you need to go out to the external market? And then what was that sort of process like?
Sure. So we at Home Depot we move a few 100,000 containers a year, and so we move a lot of volume. And we've always audited our freight and always looked at our ocean invoices to audit and see where our expenses are and if they're being charged appropriately. But if we think back to COVID times, like everyone in the room, we had a lot of detention demurrage, right? We had containers sitting at ports around the world, and we had some big invoices coming in that we need to validate and pay. And at the time, we didn't have a great mechanism for auditing those detention and demurrage invoices, which were significant. And so that's what got us into the conversations actually with BlueCargo of saying there's a need here that we don't know what's going on with these containers that we're getting billed for. We're getting conflicting data from carriers, from ports. We don't really know what the truth is there, and we need a better way to just kind of solve this problem. And that led us to these conversations with BlueCargo, and through their solution, be able to get data from ports, understand really when containers were available, what our free time was. We were able to better audit those invoices and make better decisions and go back upstairs honestly and say that we're paying a lot of money for this because this is a situation, but we feel good that we're paying the right amount and are challenging our carriers when appropriate. So it's really a niche need at the time that we had not had a great solution for.
So in other words, the delta between what you were normally paying and it being sort of a nuisance, but not something like existential, changed during the pandemic to a point where you knew you needed to address it. What was preventing you? So you realize it's become this very acute problem, serious dollars. Yeah. Why were you not able to take what you were doing before and just address it that way? Why did you need to?
I think like a lot of us in the industry, it was not, detention demurrage were not terms that we talked about much, right? Occasionally during seasonal spikes, you'd have some containers sit and you'd had some invoices, but nothing that was as impactful to us as we experienced during COVID. And I think we just didn't build the muscle memory to support that kind of work and hadn't spent time looking at doing much more deep audit on it because it wasn't a major line item for our expenses at the time.
Yeah. So can you walk people through how the relationship with BlueCargo sort of helped alleviate or address those issues? Like from a technical standpoint, what are they helping you with that you're confident going forward to kind of alleviate some of this?
Yeah, so I think when we were looking for a provider to kind of solve the problem on the Ds, as we call them, we're looking for someone who had the visibility that could not just look at the invoice and say, well, here's the invoice for $100 and here's your contract that says you'll be paying X dollars per day, so you're good. Really wanted a way to justify and go back against our terminals and carriers and say, the time that they're saying that we had the container out would actually match what time we had the container out, and if we couldn't bring the container back at a certain time for a free time to end, there's validation that that was actually the right time for the clock to start and stop. And honestly, we couldn't find providers out there that had that type of visibility and data to prove that case. So I think back to your question, Eric, we started the conversations with BlueCargo with our problem statement, and they came in and showed us how they could track the containers and get the data with their connectivity directly to the ports to understand the free time clocks. And we're able to prove out that we then go and audit those invoices and validate that the charges were accurate. We started on a detention demurrage, also drayage, and that was a space where we also had a kind of some opportunities in our audit process as well, and kind of work through those scenarios for about a year or so.
That's on carrier haulage?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're getting a bill from the carrier on.
Exactly, from the drayage from the port to our DC, and included that as well in the solution we were getting from them.
Okay. So in the past, when you had disputed bills, maybe on a smaller scale, was the terminal or the carrier sort of disputing back that their information was more correct than yours? How did that sort of process go? Because you said you're seeking out sort of validation that what you were saying was correct and that you could show, right?
Right.
So is that how that process sort of went? Like it was he said, she said, very much?
It was 100% he said, she said. Actually, I'm looking at the audience with someone from our team who was dealing with that on a daily basis, right? But it was a back and forth with emails and phone calls of trying to dispute things. And when you're moving the volume that we move, it's not, don't have enough time to do all those conversations, right? So finding something that's systemic that could do a lot of behind the scenes logic that candidly, I'm not sure even how it works, but it works the way it works, right? To make it so that we don't have to go through ourselves, but can trust the system to do that logic and spit out the exceptions where there's really kind of outliers, and those ones we can dig in ourselves, but the majority of it is processed through using the data behind the scenes. And when there are conflicts, for the most part, terminals or carriers come back and say, oh, you're right, we've got the wrong, our data is inaccurate, or invoice is wrong, we will withdraw that invoice or so forth.
Yeah, I think the technical term is magic, right? So one last question, Dan. From my experience in sort of understanding how the audit process works, a lot of times there's an assumption that a certain number is incorrect, a large number in some cases, and you are sort of screening a proportion of those invoices rather than all of those invoices. Was that your scenario, and has that changed? Are you now able to screen all of the invoices that you receive?
Yeah, so I would say, I think I'll tell a couple examples here. On the first part, we are now, all of our invoices for drayage, detention, demurrage are getting audited, and we're going through disputes that we need to, manual intervention, and feel really confident about the accuracy of that process. I think at Home Depot we've got a subsidiary group that moves a few thousand boxes a year that historically had no freight audit process. It was someone with an Excel sheet and contracts going line by line saying this looks good or not, right? And I still find that hard to believe sometimes, that being at Home Depot, that we've got part of the business that's run on spreadsheets, but we all know how our business is run, and that it happens time to time, right? And so I'd say that because we've, about 6 or 9 months ago, we moved them over fully to BlueCargo. And so now everything from their ocean, from their drayage, from their detention, demurrage, et cetera, is now going through the audit process. And that has been a major win for us. Obviously, moving from manual to systemic, that have been significant for the team, right? Things that we're not going to catch on a one-off basis, going line by line, you're going to miss, and let the magic really do the work behind the scenes.
What type of things, if you can say? Like,
I think finding discrepancies in our contract language versus the actual free time we get, and things like that. The other thing that's been, I think, really exciting for us is the analytics and data we're now talking about. And so in our drayage and detention demurrage space, we now have details at the line item level and analytics behind the scenes to say, where are we spending our money, and really allows the team to drill into those expense lines and say, should we be spending money on this? Is there a way to avoid these costs? And so you think about everything we do in our world with bobtails or moves that they're not part of the norm, giving the visibility and analytics, and this is to BlueCargo or not, but the solution has a great analytics support for it, allowing teams to spend time looking at those costs and saying, do we think this is appropriate, and how do we take costs out of the supply chain? And so, another example for my team is we had this meeting actually on Friday, I think, where we're going through all of our line item expenses on the drayage P&L every month, a detail that we couldn't before, to identify those cost out opportunities, and then building plans through that to manage that cost out, and then using the same analytics to say, where are we seeing that trend change the way that we expect and driving the business forward.
Got it. Wow, great detail. Before I move on, any thoughts that Dan has forgotten to mention in terms of like their specific case?
I can add a bit about the magic when you want to.
All right. We'll come back to that.
But not perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's go to Mike, because I think you're at that sort of intermediate identification process of the exact pain point. How acute? How did it come to the point where you realized you needed outside help? This was not something you could manage internally.
Yeah, so our journey started much in the same place Dan was talking about, right around COVID and after COVID, the amount of, for us, inbound containers and inventory kind of mismatches that we had in our network style started to pile up, right? And as this product came in, we outgrew our DCs. We weren't quick enough to find offsite space. So we really had to get down and dirty and start tactically trying to figure out what to do with these boxes and how to manage them. We started out with some brute force just within our ops teams, but that overwhelmed them quite quickly. We then pulled two of our leadership development program folks out of their day-to-day activities, threw them in a room, and we started the D&D work, right? And these folks were focused on what areas can we manage between inventory management, DC operations, our carrier partners, and then just brute force talking to everybody on a daily basis to start making some mitigation plans. Included getting some offsite space, right? Included, unfortunately, keeping some product on containers for a little while. But at least we started to draw down some of the problem. And then we got to a point where we kind of stopped the bleeding, and there was a lot of bleeding, right? If you're asking, where was our pain point and what brought it to the surface, it was this big D&D charge that we had to explain. Once we kind of got that semi under control, we then really went back and we said, we're never going to let this happen again, right? And we started to be focusing on accurate forecasting of what's coming in, really some good feedback loops with our supply planners, right? We can't get into a position where we're bringing in this type of SKU or this type of product and we don't have a good plan for either demand or space management. And those little things started to help here and there. And then we got down into the tactical day-to-day, right? This ship is coming in. We've got X amount of free days on this container. It left the port at this time. We're expecting it to be unloaded at DC1 here. And it was very manual. It's spreadsheets. It's trying to get information from our drayage carriers. It's trying to put all this together. Again, using some minimal resources that are doing their day-to-day activities. But that started to make a difference, right? And then we got to a point where, we need more horsepower and more data to make this happen. And we were able to have some initial conversations with BlueCargo and really look at what information they can help provide our team to drive improvements. I think at first we were a little reluctant to believe some of this stuff, right? And we were a little reluctant on our end to put it in place. But then the BlueCargo did, they came to the table with a really good learning session for us. I think he took our last 6-8 months worth of D&D charges, and we went back with them line by line, and we said, hey, we could have disputed this, and we could have disputed that. We went back against a couple carriers and got some money back. But by doing that, we kind of learned the process that we had to implement, and then we went live with you guys, I think, in October of last year. And we're still very tactically focused on it, right? So we didn't give up on our day-to-day, we call them our D&D destroyers team. June is out here, she's one of those leaders. Where we're still looking at every piece of data that we have, right? We're still sharing teams information. When we get to a container that's coming up for last free day or is in detention at one of our sites, the team makes a little note in Excel, which is still manual, we gotta get rid of that, just so we all know what's going on, right? And our focus is to get to zero. That's gonna be a little bit rough, but we've gone from some really big numbers to the smallest number we've ever had last year. And I would say a lot of hard work, a lot of good people, but now starting to see some of the good data coming from BlueCargo. And then the next steps with that, we've already started to use this quite a bit, is the mitigation and the dispute process, right? Back when we were even trying to do our tactical day-to-day stuff, we didn't have the resources to dispute, right? If we had 10 we thought we could dispute, right, June, we could go after 1 or 2 because we had 2 resources trying to find port times, appointment times, taking a little screenshot proving that we did return that, but just couldn't keep up with that. And that's been a big improvement for us. So that's kind of where we are today.
Juice wasn't worth the squeeze before. Right?
Yeah.
Are you similarly in the same position now to sort of screen every single invoice you get across D&D and
Yep, for D&D, I would say we probably need to do a little bit better on drayage, right? So there's some opportunities we're talking there. And we want to expand this, not just to the destination side, but all the way through ocean and origin. Some things outside of D&D that we've done to help our overall ocean costs, right? I talked a little bit about our container forecasting on a monthly basis. So our team works directly with our supply planners to ensure that, you know, we get the best number of containers and number of units forecast going out the next 12 months. We look at those end of every month, beginning of next month, and we're pretty meticulous about this by product line. And then we go back and we look at the actuals on that, right? Our next step with some of that is to be more detailed on the actuals, right? The ocean move is fine, but all the other stuff you guys were talking about seems to crop up, and we need to do a better job there. But all of these steps has made us better from an accrual and a cost management perspective. And the other thing it's done is it gives our team a lot more credibility, right? If you go back 2 or 3 years, when everybody was asking, you know, what is D&D, why is it there, all of these other questions, right? Now we can go back with some credibility and saying, here's what we're spending it on. Here is a point where, you know, we spent some money on D&D, but we didn't have the bobtail, right? Or vice versa. And that answers a lot of questions proactively. But you know, still that ongoing journey though.
Can you describe what the discussion with finance was around this? Both the initial like outreach, like, hey, we want to work with this provider that you probably have never heard of.
Yeah. So first of all, you know, what is detention? What is demurrage? We teach our folks demurrage is French because it's at the port for whatever reason. Detention is not at the port. All right, demurrage.
Demurrage.
Yep. So once we get them grounded on that, we can go to the next steps.
That's why you got into it.
But they really didn't understand, right? And once we showed them how it worked and how it tied to inventory and how it tied to our ability to try to stay ahead of it. And then some cases we knew, like some of our sites just can't turn containers in 5 or 6 or 7 days, right? So then we go out and we negotiate longer free time with the carriers. And then we've done some things where, you know, instead of an escalation of, you know, it's $100 on day one and it goes up to $500, we try to take that complexity out of it. And as we've done that, again, being credible with your forecast and delivering it as much as possible, but then explaining the reasons why something happens has improved that process. And then we build, you know, I would say we build in a little fluff here and there in our forecast, knowing that, you know, for us in November and December, you know, we have a lot of year-end product coming in, we have a lot of holidays, so there's a risk there. We'll make it up in February, March, April, things like that. Yeah.
Is BlueCargo like integrated with your finance, whether it's ERP or whatever their finance is using, or is it sort of provide a result and then you report that to finance?
Yeah, I wouldn't say integration anywhere yet, right? I think the data's there. People know where to look at it. Our next steps will be more integrating not just what BlueCargo has, but potential other data flows into either our system, our ERP system, or something standalone. We need to get to that point. Yep. We're still very manual on a lot of the things from a visibility perspective that kind of hamper our team.
Got it. Okay. It's a process.
Yeah.
You know, Tim, you're sort of the newbie in the group when it comes to this. Take us through what the, I don't mean you're a newbie, you're extremely wise, I'm just saying, in terms of this particular issue. Was there some sort of like dollar amount that sort of triggered panic, or was there just a recognition that the same kind of thing that like this needed to be addressed?
Yeah, well, coming off of COVID, we had like these two like insane amount of demurrage and detention.
Yeah.
It just exploded.
Like a factor of
Of
10, 20, 30?
yes, at least 20, I'd say.
Okay.
So it was awful, and so there was a lot of initiatives to how can we reduce this, and working really hard over the last few years to reduce it. And we didn't really know that this kind of service existed.
Yep.
It's funny, we had
I think rock bottom was the phrase you used in our prep call. I'm just looking through my
well,
notes.
so we had a couple people join TPM last year, I think, with Michelin. It's been a while since someone's been here.
Yep.
And so somebody sent me an email and said, okay, I ran into this company. didn't give any information, just talk to them. And I've been burned before, and I don't trust consultants, I don't trust vendors at all, so I was, did it as a courtesy to him.
It's a challenge
And so,
for
I had a meeting and they presented what they do, and I was like, that's interesting. Maybe I'll hear about it again. And so we had a series of meetings, and then I began to explain scenarios and understand what the service was, and they showed and demoed, and then it became more and more interesting that, hey, they can fill a need that we have, because we don't have great visibility data, milestones, we don't have them, and when we want to dispute D&D, it has to be at a certain fairly high level. And so
there's a threshold over which
and
you don't.
it's higher than it should be.
Okay. Which is an interesting topic that maybe we can get to as well.
So we have somebody raising the flag, and this person raising the flag would pass it on to somebody else who knew, and they would have to spend, I would say, a couple hours doing the research. So we make great tires, but our supply chain is a little behind. We have a number of modernizations going on right now. So it took some research, and we often could get disputes turned, but it was a lot of work to do it. And so we realized, okay, we can have somebody do this for us, and I know that we're leaving money on the table because we just don't have the manpower to do it. And the people that are doing it, they're very stressed out anyway. So we don't want to use their time doing research on these old issues. Well, D&D was the main point.
Okay.
But we've signed up for as far as import and export. We export a lot.
Yeah.
And after COVID, that was a nightmare too. So it wasn't just the D&D.
Okay.
But it's much better
Just
now.
variance in ocean freight rates.
Well, not so much the freight, but just getting exports out. That was one of the huge problems after coming after COVID.
Okay. And where are you in the process right now?
So we're implementing right now.
Okay.
So we will go live with pretty much most of our scope on March 27th. But we really needed BlueCargo to meet us where we're at. So we have different kind of customized requirements to match up with our accounting rules and the information we need to really get the full value. And so they've been able to, and we've had to learn along the way, but they've been able to adjust and give us the items that we need and be able to intake files from here and there because we have disparate data. So we really needed them to meet us where we're at. And then in the end, we needed them to be able to connect everything to US Bank, because that's our payment provider mainly for domestic at this time. We are removing another payment provider so we can consolidate. So a lot of changes for us right now happening.
I think one thread that I would pull across some of the discussions I've had here and in sessions upstairs in the tech room is this sort of evolution of technology providers being consultative in ways that they haven't been before. Like, I think there's obviously been managed services and lead logistics providers, but technology providers actually helping people understand how to get the most out of systems and connecting, as you said. I did want to just really quickly ask, the threshold issue is one, right? There's always been this issue of, can I actually audit all of my bills? That's one. And then number two is what discrepancy is worth chasing, right? So does that threshold automatically go way down if you're able to scan across all your bills and do it in a much more automated way? That's a very leading question, I know, but maybe give some actual percentage numbers. Are we talking about a threshold that was 5% and now it needs to be 0.2% or something like that?
Yeah, we were able to audit pretty well the domestic side. Yeah. It was just the import side that's we had nothing to match with. We knew what our contracts were, but it was unclear some of the items we could dispute. So instead of a high threshold, BlueCargo will go down to the lowest level. So they'll handle it from there.
Please jump in.
Is it because we run on the international scope and the different scopes of each of our customers? We run the audits with 0 threshold, so everything is systematically automated threshold.
And what was a typical threshold for a customer that would?
That, if you're able to say, I know some of them
maybe you say across your customer base, give people a range. Is it 5% not worth auditing previously?
Yeah, I've seen it from a few $100 to a few $1,000 on the invoices.
Okay, all right, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyone else want to comment on that? No? All right. Mike, I think you hinted at where this might be going next in terms of not just looking at this as like an audit, recover cash kind of that you left on the table, but like how does this inform future things you do, including procurement? So is the expectation, and maybe Dan, you can talk about what's in play right now, Mike, the expectation, and Tim down the road. Is this impacting how you choose your providers in the future? Is it impacting the nature of the contract that you sign with them? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so I would say from our side, we are using the data that we now have a good 18 months, almost 2 years worth of data to say, how are we awarding business, right? Who's making it harder for us to process payments, which should be the least of our concerns in the supply chain space, right? And taking time away from what we care about is getting product where it needs to go. So
Yeah.
100% it's impacting how we think about a business.
And if essentially the rate is the same and the other service metrics are the same, but this one is obviously easier to work with and invoicing you accurately more often, they're the one, but how about if one's a little bit worse in performance or a little higher in rate, but they're awesome at getting you accurate invoices? How do you sort of toggle that?
I think it becomes a bigger factor in the conversation than it was before. I think having data behind it to make a decision is better than anecdotes from the team.
Yep.
I think we try, at Home Depot try to be a shipper of choice, right? Where carriers want to work with us, and we want to do this, want the carriers to, on the same expectations. So definitely something that we look at now when there's award discussions.
Yep. Mike, are you there yet, or?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're there from a pure award perspective. I would say specifically on the D&D side, we can see the carriers that understand the data that's either in BlueCargo or we're communicating back and forth, like we gotta get this off the terminal or we gotta get this out of our DC. And we had one carrier that wasn't working with us on that and they're no longer with us. But a lot of the other ones are very, very close to our ops team to get that done. I'd say one other thing, just to, one of the things we saw with BlueCargo, and I kid the team, again, we started just with D&D, right? So the expectation was BlueCargo would monitor our data and go after help for us. But as soon as we went live, the first screen that came up, remember this? Gave us like, all right, this is what's at origin port, this is what's in transit, they gave us all this cool stuff and they were all zeros, right? And I'm like, can we have that completed and filled out? And they did it, right? It was like not a big IT project, you flipped a couple switch, we had to give you some data, but it was silly, but it was simple, right? We could go get the data somewhere else on a giant spreadsheet we get from our 4PL, but in their system, you just click on the container, right? And then the very key thing that we look at every day is right on the bottom of that screen, right? What's in demurrage, what's in detention, and if anything shows up on there, we're sending stuff back and forth, right? So, that's what we're picturing.
Now, we made it long enough. This audience, right? They don't believe in magic, so.
Yeah, and just to close the loop on the partnership with the carriers, I think BlueCargo is the first purpose-built international freight auditor. So actually the experience of the carriers changed working with us. Like some of the drayage carriers that you guys work with or forwarders are also our customers on the AR side. And so basically what they're saying is having the first auditor that understands the real world of drayage, of operations, of getting an empty container back at the terminal has made it easier for them. It reduces the number of disputes and back and forth because it's a whole backlog and manual communication on their end too when there's disputes. So that's been able to go down, been able to make them be paid faster, and that's the whole thing about. We talked about looking at the historical invoices to prove to Mike that it was working, but the model is a pre-audit, prepayment. So basically we're not looking at making any money on savings. We're solving
Catching it before it happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And actually it's solving the root cause.
Yeah.
So this is really long-term partnerships we're building so that we're working with every vendor depending on the mode to solve the root cause and then help them stay compliant because everyone needs to be compliant. And when something like OSRA came out, because we were talking about D&D specifically, OSRA gives you 30 days to audit the bill. Then then it's over. So if you don't have that evidence collection in real time and you leveraging the technology to be able to answer to the compliance asks, this was not possible before, and this is where the system comes in.
So just to be clear, it's 30 and then you can dispute it, it's another 30,
Yes.
right? Yeah. There was an episode that Alex and I did on my show, if you want to go chapter and verse on that. But
Yes, but also
very interesting. So we had another session, Jack, I'll get you in just a second. We had another session, I think just an hour ago, talking about the how trying it is on the drayage side, right? And so very interesting to hear kind of like how this is a two-sided thing where it can be like win-win rather than zero-sum. So Jack, did you have a question?
Only for doing questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have a mic? Or I can just repeat it, because we only have 2 minutes, so yeah, go ahead.
So, first of all, thank you. So Jack, I'm formerly with Procter & Gamble. I remember a few years ago, you and I were on stage on this very topic. And so congratulations, Michael, to the education you're giving on NOD and the time to start all these things. But I'm still curious. I mean, back then, we were even on a campaign to get rid of the word free time.
Free time.
But I still hear it used, right?
Yeah.
One way to get rid of all detention and demurrage is to negotiate for 45 days of free time.
Yeah.
Right? That's not the answer, right? But operationally, people do it all the time. So I'm just curious, like, one, at what point can we agree to stop calling it free time as an industry and call it prepaid time? And then in that, have, because every time you ask for more, there's a cost, so it's not free. But like, really getting at operationally, people understanding how long do they really take, and then only negotiate for that which you need without changing in your operation. So just curious if you guys have had discussions around free time with your folks internally.
I'm not going to be able to repeat that question. I was like,
I don't even
forgot
know
it 3
why
seconds
you
in.
You knew it was going to be long.
Yeah, every time. So Jack and I have talked about this topic a lot in the past. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And I'm always reminded of Team America World Police when they say freedom ain't free, And it's like, because if free time isn't free, right? So, yeah. Did you want to respond, Mike?
I would appreciate the free time, right? As we all understand, your pricing is going to depend on how long you keep a container in a box. It's funny, but we had this conversation. Tristan is in here. He's our purchasing guy. But we did try to extend free time a couple times over the last few years, and we were successful at it without getting a lot of price increase. But then the other thing that we do on a regular basis is we show the carriers what we're actually doing, right? So if we sign up for 12 or 14, right, and we're in practice delivering at 8, we want the same free time number the next round, but here's what we're delivering, right? And if we don't get there, we'll talk to you guys about why we're missing. But we've done a very good job of keeping 95% of the boxes within a reasonable time, so that when the other ones go a little bit high, we do have a good time.
We also, I think, made it somehow through this panel without mentioning AI one time. Maybe
Wow.
not. Let's give ourselves a